The bitter winter of 1876 howled through Silver Creek, Wyoming territory, as Katherine Rose stumbled up the church steps, her body racked with fever and her threadbare shawl offering little protection against the merciless cold. Her trembling fingers clutched the weathered wood of the church door, but her strength failed her before she could pull it open. Owen Sullivan spotted her from across the street as he secured his horse outside the general store. Something about the way she swayed against the harsh wind made him abandon his errands and sprint through the ankle-deep snow toward the small white church perched at the end of the muddy main street. "Miss, are you all right?" he called, his deep voice barely audible over the whistling wind. When she didn't respond, he took the steps 2 at a time, reaching her just as her knees buckled. Katherine felt strong arms catch her before she hit the hard wooden steps. Through fevered eyes, she gazed up at a weathered face framed by a worn Stetson. Dark stubble covered his jaw, and concern filled his deep-set blue eyes. "I'll carry you," the cowboy said, lifting her with ease. His voice was gentle yet firm, leaving no room for argument even if she'd had the strength to protest. Katherine tried to speak, but her throat felt as if she'd swallowed broken glass. All she could manage was a weak nod as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. Owen kicked at the church door, his boots leaving clumps of snow on the threshold as Reverend Miller appeared, his lined face registering shock at the sight before him. "Good heavens! What's happened?" The elderly preacher ushered them inside the modest sanctuary. "Found her collapsing on your steps, Reverend. She's burning with fever." Owen adjusted his hold on the woman, whose head now rested limply against his shoulder. "She needs a doctor. Dr. Jenkins left for Cheyenne 2 days ago. Won't be back until next week." The Reverend wrung his hands. "The nearest doctor's in Fort Laramie, and in this weather." Owen made a quick decision. "I'll take her to my cabin. It's closer than town, and my mother taught me enough about treating fevers." The Reverend hesitated. "A young woman alone with a bachelor? People will talk, Mr. Sullivan. With respect, Reverend, she'll die if she doesn't get warm and get medicine soon. I don't give a damn what people say." Owen's voice carried the hardened edge of a man who'd stopped caring about public opinion long ago. Reverend Miller studied Owen's face before nodding slowly. "You're right. God forgive me for hesitating when a life hangs in the balance." He hurried to a small cabinet and retrieved a worn woolen blanket. "Wrap her in this. I'll send my wife to assist as soon as I can." Owen wrapped the blanket around Katherine's shivering form and headed back into the raging storm. He managed to mount his horse with her cradled against his chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps that formed tiny clouds in the freezing air. "Hang on, miss," he murmured against her hair as he urged his horse forward. "Just hang on." The 5-mile ride to his cabin seemed endless. By the time the small log structure came into view, nestled against a stand of pines, Owen's arms ached from holding her steady. Snow had collected on her eyelashes and dusted her pale face, giving her an ethereal appearance that troubled him deeply. Owen kicked open his cabin door and carried Katherine inside. The embers in the fireplace still glowed, and he quickly added kindling and logs until a proper fire blazed. He laid her gently on his bed, removing her wet shoes and outer garments with clinical efficiency before covering her with every blanket he owned. He brewed willow bark tea and spooned it carefully between her cracked lips. When she coughed weakly, he took it as a good sign that she could swallow. "That's it," he encouraged, though he doubted she could hear him. "Fight this, you hear me? I didn't haul you through a blizzard just to lose you now." For 3 days Owen barely slept. He kept the fire roaring, prepared broth and medicinal teas, and bathed Katherine's forehead with cool cloths when her fever spiked dangerously high. On the second night, when she thrashed and called out for someone named Thomas, Owen held her hand and spoke soothingly until she quieted. On the morning of the 4th day, Owen dozed in a chair beside the bed when a soft voice startled him awake. "Where am I?" Catherine's voice was hoarse but clear, her green eyes focused for the first time since he'd found her. Owen straightened, relief washing over him. "My cabin, about 5 miles outside of Silver Creek. I'm Owen Sullivan. Found you at the church steps 4 days ago." Katherine tried to sit up but fell back weakly. 4 days? You've been mighty sick with fever. Thought I might lose you a couple times." Owen poured a cup of water and helped her drink. "What's your name, if you don't mind my asking?" "Katherine Rose." I'm not sure how to thank you." Her voice caught as the enormity of her situation dawned on her. "You've been caring for me all this time?" Owen nodded, suddenly aware of his unshaven face and rumpled clothing. "Reverend Miller's wife came by once, but the weather's been too treacherous for regular visits." Catherine's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "My reputation means a sight less than your life," Owen finished firmly. "Besides, the Reverend knows you're here. Nothing improper's happened." A flush that had nothing to do with fever colored Catherine's cheeks. "Of course. I didn't mean to imply, no offense taken." Owen stood and moved to the stove. "Think you could manage some broth? You need your strength." Over the next few days, as Catherine's strength slowly returned, they began to learn about each other. Owen discovered she was 22 and had traveled from Boston after her parents died of influenza. She'd been headed to live with her uncle in Laramie, but the stagecoach had left her in Silver Creek when she began showing signs of illness. "They didn't want sickness spreading to the other passengers," she explained bitterly. "The driver said I could wait for the next stage in 3 days. I had just enough money for a room at the boarding house, but Mrs. Hollister took one look at me and refused entry." "Sounds like Agatha Hollister," Owen replied with a grimace. "Woman's terrified of any ailment more serious than a hangnail." Katherine smiled faintly. "I thought the church might offer shelter, at least until morning. That's the last thing I remember clearly." Owen shared pieces of his own story as well. At 31, he'd spent most of his adult life working cattle drives and breaking horses before purchasing his small ranch 3 years earlier. He was making a modest living raising horses and doing carpentry work in town when needed. "Never thought I'd settle in one place," he admitted one evening as they sat before the fire. Katherine wrapped in a quilt in the rocking chair while Owen whittled a small wooden figure. "Spent too many years drifting." "What changed your mind?" Katherine asked, watching his capable hands shape the wood with careful precision. Owen was silent for a long moment. "Lost my best friend in a river crossing in 73. Made me realize I was getting too old to die with nothing to my name but a saddle and a month's wages." He glanced up, a rare smile softening his features. "Besides, I got tired of sleeping on the ground." As another week passed, Katherine regained enough strength to move around the cabin. She insisted on helping with meals and simple chores, though Owen protested that she should rest. "I've been resting for days," she said firmly as she kneaded dough for biscuits. "I'll go mad if I stay in that bed another hour." Owen leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Stubborn woman, aren't you?" "I prefer determined," Katherine replied with a hint of mischief in her eyes. The easy conversation between them felt natural, as if they'd known each other far longer than the short time they'd been acquainted. Owen found himself looking forward to their talks by the fire each evening, and Katherine discovered that beneath his rough exterior lay a thoughtful, intelligent man. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after Owen had found her, Katherine broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I should be well enough to travel soon," she said quietly as they sat at the small table eating venison stew. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Owen's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "That's very kind, but..." Katherine hesitated. "People will talk." More than they already are, I'm sure. Let them. Owen's tone was dismissive. Folks around here have short memories. Something new will catch their attention soon enough. Katherine studied her bowl. I still need to reach my uncle in Laramie. He's expecting me, and he's my only family now. The stage comes through in 3 days, Owen said after a moment. I could take you into town if you're set on going. Something in his voice made Katherine look up. Their eyes met across the table, and for a breathless moment, neither spoke. Owen was the first to look away, rising to add wood to the stove. I should at least write to him, Katherine said finally, to let him know I'm well and will arrive soon. Owen nodded, his back still turned. I'll take a letter to town tomorrow. That night, Katherine lay awake long after Owen had retired to his bedroll near the fireplace. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, the steady sound of his breathing, the quiet way he moved about the cabin, the surprising gentleness in his calloused hands when he'd helped her during the worst of her illness. The thought of leaving filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. Her uncle was a stranger to her, known only through occasional correspondence with her father. Owen Sullivan, however, had become familiar in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The next morning, Owen saddled his horse early. Need anything from town besides posting your letter? Katherine handed him the sealed envelope. Perhaps some yarn if Mr. Peterson has any? I'd like to knit you a scarf before I leave, as a small token of my gratitude. Owen's expression softened. No need for that. I want to, she insisted. Please. He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Katherine alone for the first time since he'd carried her from the church steps. She used the solitude to thoroughly clean the cabin, determined to repay at least some small portion of his kindness. She was hanging freshly washed linens by the fire when she heard a wagon approaching. Expecting Owen, she was surprised to see Reverend Miller and his wife instead. Miss Rose, the Reverend greeted her as she opened the door. We've come to check on you. I'm pleased to see you up and about. Mrs. Miller, a plump woman with kind eyes, carried a basket covered with a cloth. We've brought some provisions. And, she added in a lower voice, I thought you might appreciate some female company after being confined with Mr. Sullivan all this time. Katherine welcomed them inside, grateful for their thoughtfulness but slightly offended by the implication. Mr. Sullivan has been a perfect gentleman, she said firmly. Of course, dear. Mrs. Miller patted her hand. But a young woman in your situation must be careful of appearances. As they shared tea, the Reverend cleared his throat. Miss Rose, we've come with a proposition as well. Mrs. Hollister at the boarding house has agreed to give you a room at reduced rate until the stage departs. We thought you might be more comfortable there. Katherine's hands tightened around her cup. That's very kind, but I'm not sure Mrs. Hollister would welcome someone she previously turned away. She feels terrible about that misunderstanding, Mrs. Miller assured her, and it would be more appropriate than remaining here unchaperoned. Before Katherine could respond, the door opened and Owen entered, stomping snow from his boots. He stopped short at the sight of visitors. Reverend Mrs. Miller. He nodded politely, though his jaw tightened. To what do we owe the pleasure? The Reverend explained their offer, and Owen's expression grew increasingly stony. When they finished, he hung his coat deliberately before speaking. Miss Rose is welcome here as long as she chooses to stay, he said quietly. But the decision is hers. All eyes turned to Katherine, who felt torn between propriety and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this cabin and the man who had saved her life. I appreciate your concern, she said carefully. But I'm still regaining my strength, and moving again so soon might not be wise. I'll remain here until the stage departure, if Mr. Sullivan doesn't object. Owen's shoulders relaxed slightly. I don't object. After the Millers departed, an awkward silence fell between them. Owen busied himself with unpacking the supplies he'd purchased while Katherine returned to her cleaning. "I got your yarn," he said finally, placing a bundle of soft blue wool on the table. "And this." He added a book beside it, a collection of poetry by Tennyson. Katherine touched the book reverently. "How did you know I like poetry?" "You recited some in your fever dreams." A faint flush colored his cheeks. "Thought you might enjoy having something to read besides my old almanacs." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you." That evening, Katherine read aloud from the book as Owen worked on mending a bridle. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, how natural it felt to share this quiet moment, how easily they'd fallen into companionable routines. When she retired to bed that night, Katherine found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. She was developing feelings for Owen Sullivan that went beyond gratitude. Feelings that complicated her plans and obligations. The next day brought clear skies and milder temperatures. Owen suggested a short walk to help restore her strength, and Katherine eagerly agreed, desperate for fresh air after weeks of confinement. He helped her navigate the snowy path leading from the cabin toward a small frozen creek. Katherine breathed deeply, savoring the crisp air and brilliant sunshine reflecting off the pristine snow. "It's beautiful here," she said, gazing at the mountains in the distance. "So different from Boston." "Takes some getting used to," Owen admitted. "The winters are harsh, but spring makes up for it." Katherine pictured the landscape transformed by wildflowers and fresh green grass. "I wish I could see that." Owen glanced at her. "You could." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Katherine's pulse quickened, and she focused on the path ahead. "My uncle is expecting me," she reminded him and herself. "Yes," Owen agreed quietly. "He is." They walked in silence until they reached the creek, where Owen cleared snow from a fallen log so they could sit. Katherine watched the sunlight glint off the ice, gathering her courage. "Why did you help me that day?" she asked suddenly. "You could have called for someone else, or left me at the church." Owen considered her question seriously. "Never been one to walk past someone in trouble. And something about you." He shook his head. "Can't explain it. Just knew I couldn't leave you there." "I've never met anyone like you," Katherine admitted. "Most men I knew in Boston were more concerned with appearances and social standing than doing what's right." "Not much use for social standing out here," Owen replied with a hint of amusement. "A man's judged by his actions and his word." "And women?" Katherine asked. "How are they judged?" Owen's expression grew thoughtful. "Same way, I reckon. Though folks can be harder on women sometimes. Not fair, but that's how it is. The Millers certainly seemed concerned about my reputation. They mean well." Owen picked up a stick and drew patterns in the snow. "But I've never put much stock in what others think. Life's too short." Katherine studied his profile, the strong jaw, the small scar near his right temple, the lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "Have you ever been married, Owen?" The question seemed to surprise him. "No. Came close once about 10 years back. She decided a cowboy's life wasn't stable enough. Married a shopkeeper instead." "I'm sorry," Owen shrugged. "Worked out for the best. She wanted city comforts I couldn't provide." He glanced at her. "What about you? No fiancé waiting in Boston?" Katherine shook her head. "There was someone. Thomas. We were childhood friends, and everyone expected us to marry. But after my parents died, he showed his true character. Was more interested in my family's modest inheritance than in supporting me through my grief." Owen's expression darkened. "Some men don't deserve the title." "It was a difficult lesson," Katherine acknowledged. "But necessary, I suppose." As they walked back to the cabin, Owen offered his arm when the path grew slippery. Katherine took it, acutely aware of his strength and the warmth that seemed to emanate from him despite the cold. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Katherine began knitting with the blue yarn, her needles clicking rhythmically. Owen watched her hands move with practiced skill. "My mother knitted," he remarked. "Used to make socks for all the ranch hands at Christmas." "Is she still living?" Katherine asked. Owen shook his head. "Passed when I was 17. Father followed 3 years later." "You've been alone a long time." "Got used to it." He poked at the fire. "But I won't pretend it's always easy." Katherine nodded, understanding all too well the hollow ache of loneliness. The hardest times are when something good happens, and you turn to share it with someone who isn't there anymore. Owen looked at her with such intensity that she nearly dropped a stitch. Exactly that. The next day was Katherine's last before the stage would arrive. Neither mentioned her impending departure as they went about their usual routines, though a tension hummed beneath every interaction. After dinner, Katherine presented Owen with the finished scarf, a simple pattern in the soft blue wool that complemented his eyes. "It's not much," she said as he ran his fingers over the neat stitches. "But I hope it will keep you warm when winter lingers." "It's perfect," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." He disappeared briefly into the small storage room and returned with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Got this for you in town. For your journey." Katherine unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "Owen, this is too generous. Thought you might want to write down your thoughts. New territory, new beginnings." He hesitated. "And maybe you could write to me sometimes. Let me know how you're faring." Katherine blinked back tears. "I would like that very much." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. When Katherine finally rose to retire, Owen caught her hand. "Katherine." He rarely used her full name, and it sent a shiver through her. "I'm not a man of many words, but I need to say something before tomorrow." She waited, her heart beating rapidly as he gathered his thoughts. "These weeks with you have been different, better than anything I've known in a long time." He swallowed hard. "I know you have obligations, family waiting, but if there was any chance you might consider staying, or perhaps returning after you've seen your uncle." He trailed off, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Katherine's breath caught. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you to consider it," Owen amended. "I know it's not much, a small cabin, a life harder than what you're used to, but I think we could build something good together." His calloused fingers tightened around hers. "I've never met anyone like you either." Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Owen." A loud knocking interrupted her response. Owen released her hand reluctantly and moved to the door. Reverend Miller stood on the porch, his expression grave. "Evening, Owen. Miss Rose. Sorry to disturb you so late, but I've news that couldn't wait." He handed Katherine a telegram. "This arrived for you this afternoon." Katherine opened it with trembling fingers and read the brief message. Her uncle had passed away suddenly 2 weeks earlier. The house in Laramie had been sold to cover debts. She sank into a chair, the paper clutched in her hand. "He's gone. My uncle is dead." Owen and the Reverend exchanged concerned glances. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Rose," the Reverend said gently. "This is difficult news indeed. What will you do now?" Owen asked after the Reverend had departed. Katherine stared into the dying fire. "I don't know. I have some money saved, but not enough to return to Boston. And there's nothing for me there anyway." Owen knelt beside her chair. "Stay here." "Owen, not just because you have nowhere else," he clarified quickly, "but because I want you here. Because these weeks have shown me what my life could be with you in it." He took her hands in his. "I know it's fast, Too fast, maybe. But some things you just know. Katherine studied their joined hands, her pale, smooth fingers entwined with his sun-darkened, work-roughened ones. Such different lives they'd led, yet here they were, connected by chance or perhaps something more. I was going to say yes, she said softly, before the Reverend knocked. I was going to say yes, I would come back after seeing my uncle. She met his gaze steadily. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, following the path laid out for me. But from the moment you carried me from those church steps, everything changed. Hope bloomed in Owen's eyes. Is that still your answer? Yes, Katherine whispered. I want to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I can't imagine being anywhere else. Owen pulled her gently from the chair and into his arms. His kiss was tender, reverent, as if she were something precious he feared might break. Katherine returned it with all the emotion that had been building within her. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I'm not a wealthy man, Katherine. Can't offer you much beyond this cabin and my heart. Your heart is more valuable than any fortune, she replied, and cabins can be expanded. His smile lit his entire face. That they can. 2 days later, they stood before Reverend Miller in the small Silver Creek church, exchanging vows with the winter sun streaming through stained glass windows. Mrs. Miller and a handful of townspeople witnessed the simple ceremony. Some raised eyebrows at the hasty wedding, but most were silenced by the unmistakable devotion evident between the unlikely pair. The woman from Boston and the Wyoming cowboy had found something rare on those snow-covered church steps. That evening, as they sat before the fire in their cabin no longer his, but theirs, Katherine leaned against Owen's shoulder. I never expected to find a home here, she confessed. When I left Boston, I thought I was simply running from grief. Owen's arm tightened around her. Sometimes we find exactly what we need in the place we least expect it. Katherine thought of the fever that had nearly claimed her life, of the stranger who had carried her through a blizzard, of the man who had become her husband. Do you believe in fate, Owen? He considered the question seriously. I believe that life offers opportunities, and it's up to us to recognize them. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Finding you was my opportunity. Best decision I ever made was carrying you off those steps. Even when I was delirious with fever and soaking your coat with snow, she teased. Even then, his voice grew serious. I knew somehow. Didn't understand it, but I knew you were going to matter to me. As the winter months gave way to spring, Katherine and Owen settled into married life with surprising ease. She learned to manage a ranch household, and he discovered the joy of coming home to someone who lit up at the sight of him. They expanded the cabin that summer, adding a proper bedroom and a small porch where Katherine could sit and write while watching the sunset. Owen's carpentry skills transformed the humble structure into a comfortable home filled with simple treasures, bookshelves for Katherine's growing collection, a rocking chair crafted by Owen's hands, wildflowers in mason jars on the kitchen table. Word of Katherine's skill with herbal remedies spread through the area, and soon people were visiting the Sullivan Ranch not just for Owen's horses but for Katherine's healing tonics as well. The income from her small apothecary business allowed them to add more livestock and eventually hire a ranch hand. On their first anniversary, as they walked along the creek that had frozen solid when Katherine first saw it, Owen presented her with a small wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. Open it, he urged. Katherine did, finding a tiny sketch of the church where they'd met on one side and their cabin on the other. Where you found me, and where we found each other, she said softly, tears welling in her eyes. Owen fastened it around her neck. Every day, I thank God for sending you to those church steps. Katherine touched the locket reverently. And I thank him for sending you to carry me away. They stood together as the Wyoming sunset painted the landscape in gold and crimson. Two souls who had discovered that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple act of kindness and the words, "I'll carry you."